I'm very happy to be joined today by our guest, Professor Garth Pere. Professor Garth is a senior associate at the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection. Good morning, Professor Garth. How are you? Hello? Good morning, Professor. It seems we're experiencing some technical difficulties, for which I apologize. We're unable so far to reach Professor Garth. I'll try again. Morning, Professor. Well, in the meantime, as we're trying to... oh, are we going to ads? Okay, we go to ads. All right.
Connect and stay ahead with live from South Africa.
Deepest apologies for the technical issues that we were experiencing. Hopefully this time we will be able to reach Professor Garth. Just to reiterate, Professor Garth Pere is a senior associate at the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection. Good morning, Professor. Can you hear me now?
Good. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much, Professor, for your patience. Welcome to the...
I've connected via my phone, so let's try that.
Yes, inshallah it will work. I can hear you perfectly loud and clear, and luckily you can also hear me as well. Thank you, Professor.
Excellent.
How are you?
Very well, very well.
Wonderful. So, Professor, our story at the top of the show today is about the new American ambassador, Leo Brent Bozell III. He presented his letters of credence to Clayson Moniela, Deputy Director General of the South African Department of International Relations and Cooperation, and the Acting Chief of State Protocol at the DIRCO offices yesterday, I believe. Who is this guy, Leo Brent Bozell III?
Well, he has a very interesting but controversial background. You know, he's the founder of the Media Research Center in the US, which is essentially a conservative kind of think tank to expose liberal bias in the media. He also has a background as a right-wing ideologue in the sense that, you know, under the Conservative Political Action Conference, he promoted that very same agenda to sort of embed a right-wing discourse in the United States, on the basis of conservative values and so on and so forth. And he also has a bit of a pedigree as an activist against South Africa, in the sense, there are a couple of two examples actually. When Oliver Tambo visited the United States to have an interaction with Ronald Reagan, he was very critical of Ronald Reagan for meeting a so-called terrorist. And he also he was also very critical about the fact that Nelson Mandela enjoyed this global iconic status, and especially in the United States. So he comes from that rather conservative background. And what is very interesting also is that he was extremely critical leading up to the Republican nomination in 2016, very critical of Donald Trump. And he had some choice words in describing Donald Trump as a charlatan, as a huckster, and a shameless self-promoter. And then he had this political conversion, as it were, when Donald Trump won the Republican nomination, and he became one of Donald Trump's most ardent supporters. So that, in a nutshell, is who Brent Bozell is. And as you correctly observe in your introduction, he's now presented his letters of credence, which was accepted by the acting Chief of State Protocol, Clayton Moniela. So to all intents and purposes, he is now the American ambassador in South Africa. What's also interesting is his passage to the nomination process. In effect, Donald Trump nominated him, I think it was in January 2025, to take up what was called the U.S. Agency for Global Media, which Donald Trump then ironically shut down 2 months later in March 2025. And I suppose as compensation for Bozell not taking up that post, he was then nominated to be the ambassador to South Africa. He went through the process in the Senate, confirmed, and now here he is on the ground in South Africa. So that, in a broad sketch, is who Brent Bozell III is. And, the big question is, what can we expect based on this background from his ambassadorship and his tenure in South Africa?
Indeed. I mean, the next thing I was going to ask you actually is how is he different from previous U.S. ambassadors to South Africa? It's not very frequent that an ambassador presenting their letters is a top of the morning news story.
Well, it's because of his background and the real fractured and fractious recent history between the United States and South Africa. It's very important to note that South Africa enjoyed a very close bilateral relationship and the chemistry with the United States, starting with this country's democratic transition in 1994. As a matter of fact, South Africa had a very high-level binational commission with the United States, which was chaired at the time by the two deputies. Well, the deputy president of South Africa in the form of Thabo Mbeki, and the vice president of the United States at the time in the form of Al Gore. So that chairmanship used to rotate between the United States and South Africa as sort of indicative of the importance which the United States attached to South Africa, its transition, and the support that South Africa was going to give to South Africa, both in political and diplomatic terms, as well as economically, by the way, to support that transitional process. And that has been a very important, underpinning, both in the philosophy of the cooperation as well as its, operational dynamics. Until, the Donald Trump administration came along, and already in 2016, Donald Trump, signaled his displeasure, for example, with the kind of preferences that countries enjoyed under the African Growth and Opportunity Act, primarily singling out a country like South Africa, which was one of the major and continues to be one of the major beneficiaries of that dispensation. And then Trump issues the executive order in February 2025, which notes egregious actions in this country, primarily, the fabrication and the spurious allegation that there is a white genocide in South Africa, number one. Number two, that South Africa makes common cause and then forms alliances with countries which undermine America's national security interests, primarily China, Russia, and Iran. Then the third, cause celebre, was that South Africa had then initiated the genocide case against Israel at the International Court of Justice. So those three factors then conspired, for Trump to issue this executive order against South Africa. And then that was followed in March of 2025 by the expulsion of Ibrahim Rasool as ambassador in South Africa as persona non grata, because he made some rather so-called injudicious remarks about Trump fomenting a white supremacy agenda. And the sad thing, though, is that since then, in March 2025 up to now, almost a year, that South Africa has not appointed a replacement to Ibrahim Rasool. But here we have Brent Bozell III in South Africa. And he was almost unequivocal in his confirmation hearing, that he was going to put pressure on South Africa to drop its genocide case against Israel in the ICC. Little understanding, you see, and this is where Brent Bozell's lack of experience and understanding, the protocols of diplomacy kick in, because South Africa initiated that case at the ICJ on the basis of a moral principle and the imperative to expose the social injustices suffered by the Palestinians, under that genocidal assault against Gaza.
Thank you very much. Professor Garth, there's still so much to discuss on this matter. So would you be willing to just hang on with us until after this break so we can continue talking about it?
Indeed.
Thank you so much, Professor Garth. And with that, listeners, we will be back with you after this short break.
For the first time, I can dream again.
The Africa Muslims Agency
Ramadan.
And we are back. With it is me, Abdullah Mwaswis, with Professor Garth Pere. Professor Garth, as we mentioned, is a senior associate at the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection. Thank you very much for staying with us, Professor.
You're welcome.
So, Professor, just before the break, you had mentioned, that of course, the incident, of course, of Ambassador Ibrahim Rasool, who was previously South Africa's ambassador to the U.S., who got expelled by Trump, as you say, for certain comments that he had made. At least the Americans saw this as him being undiplomatic, and a lot of discourse at the time was, an ambassador should not upset their host, and this is, not very ambassadorial, and whatever, and so on and so forth. And so, I mean, we're very used to Trump being very hypocritical. Just yesterday, with one of our guests, we had been discussing how, in Arabic we have this phrase, which is "Yom asal, yom basal," one day honey, one day onions, and that seems to be President Trump's behavior with regards to a lot of his domestic and his foreign policy decisions and his behavior in the media as well. But it is quite striking that there is a very obvious disconnect between the kind of pretext on which Ambassador Ibrahim Rasool was expelled from the United States, and the fact that Trump's appointment of Brent Bozell III seems to be a very open provocation, and not really a very kind of shrewd diplomatic choice. And so, I mean, as a sub question to that as well, you had also touched upon Ambassador Bozell's views relating to the anti-apartheid movement, and the fact that he was quite against it. And I believe he did refer to this as a movement for terrorism. So
right.
I would so kind of at two levels. One is, do you have any comments about this disconnect between President Trump's view towards how he managed the situation with Ambassador Ibrahim Rasool, and then as a kind of sub question to that, why would a man who holds South Africa in such contempt be sent to live here for an ambassadorial term of years?
Well, these are some of the conundrums that underpin the unpredictability, the mercurial behavior of Trump as a president, and a kind of capriciousness that goes with that. It sort of defies logic. But maybe there is a method in the madness, in the sense that, Brent Bozell is here to advance a certain kind of ideological agenda. And I think he will discover very quickly that South Africa is a very different place from what was depicted, by Donald Trump in that, characterization in his executive order of February 2025. So Brent Bozell will have to climb a very steep learning curve. I presume that he has inherited a competent staff. These are people that come from the U.S. State Department. They are here in South Africa on the ground. And he will have to undergo a socialization process to understand the nature of our politics, the nature of our government. You will have to understand, the sociology of this country in terms of what makes it tick as a constitutional democracy, that there are certain underlying imperatives that shape how we conduct our national discourse, and he will have to fit into that. He cannot treat South Africa as a banana republic. We are far from that. And the second thing related to that is that there are certain diplomatic protocols that will demand judicious behavior on his part. It will demand a certain approach and modalities of behavior in interacting with this government in a way, that conforms to the necessary conventions of diplomatic behavior and practice. In that sense, I think Bozell will be disciplined very quickly in his interactions with the broad social landscape of this country, as he discovers, that we are a beautiful country, a very noisy democracy of ideas, a marketplace of ideas as a democracy. and that you will have to recalibrate what his essential objectives are going to be in this country, and the kind of diplomatic messages that he then dispatches to Washington and to his principal. So that at least, is what will be demanded of somebody that has absolutely no diplomatic experience and no diplomatic background. So he will have to, as I say, negotiate a very steep learning curve very quickly. And I think this is also now an opportunity for the minds of the South African government to be concentrated. As I said, we are approaching almost 1 year next month since Ibrahim Rasool's infelicitous recall from Washington. So we do not have, the equivalent of Brent Bozell in Washington to sort of lubricate the wheels of the messages that we want to send, to the lawmakers on the Capitol, and really to reset, as it were, the kind of relations that we want to promote. Even though, that has changed quite fundamentally, the paradigm of relations between South Africa and the United States since 1994 have undergone, this significant change by virtue of Trump's rather negative and spurious disposition towards this country. But I think that there are still some levers that we can pull on the economic side. It's very important to note, that the African Growth and Opportunity Act has been extended by the U.S. Congress for another year, and that has been approved by Donald Trump. In that year, we have to do significant groundwork and homework to understand, what are the sort of circuits of economic interaction that we want to promote with the United States, and focus on that. Our economic diplomacy then becomes quite an important part, of how we reset and recalibrate and move the needle in this relationship with the United States. And these are quite significant. 40% of our exports to the United States through AGOA are quite significant in agriculture and automotive, accounting for almost 100,000 jobs. But the 60% are quite significant too. And these are the parts of the export basket, essentially minerals and natural resources that enter the United States, duty-free. They are not subject to that 30% tariff. And that is quite a strategic lever, because that still gives us significant advantage in terms of the critical minerals that we can use as negotiating leverage in terms of resetting this. But it's also, I think, an invitation for South Africa to rethink the broad geostrategic landscape of our international economic relations in a way that reduces this path dependency on the United States.
Absolutely. And it's good that, we've kind of entered as well the sort of subtopic of South Africa's response and how it will respond to kind of the way in which US foreign policy is being recalibrated towards it. And so, just as a matter of protocol, what does it indicate to us that that Ambassador Bozell's credentials were presented not to the president or the deputy president or the minister or the director general of DIRCO, but to the Deputy Director General and Acting Chief of State Protocol? Is that significant?
Well, it is significant in the sense that it basically legitimizes his presence in South Africa, such that he can get into the trenches of diplomacy and start learning his job. So the letters of credence and the acceptance thereof by Clayson Maniela is important in that sense, to get him accepted as the ambassador. Now that does not mean that he will not meet the president at a future date. There is, I think, a planned ceremony where his letters of credence and his credentials will be accepted by President Ramaphosa at a future date, but not one-on-one, I don't think. There are a number of other incoming ambassadors, so I think at Union Buildings, there will be a joint ceremony, and Brent Bozell will be part of the other group of incoming ambassadors who will present their credentials to the president. But I think it is quite important for DIRCO and our principals in government to be quite proactive with this ambassador, to engage him quite openly and transparently. And I think it's also important not to antagonize him, as it were, knowing that he has this rather strange ideological disposition. He is a right-wing ideologue in his leaning and in his background, but to actually engage him quite openly and basically to debunk some of his thinking. I'm thinking, we've got extremely important and smart business organizations, Business Unity South Africa, which has a stake, in the nature of our exports, not only to South Africa but globally, is a very important player in our economic landscape. There are any number of other instances that can engage the ambassador, draw him into the academic circuit, invite him to do lectures to students, invite him to have media interviews, and where it can be probed very critically. Our media is extremely critical. And I would also recommend Dr. Abdullah that Salam Media also use the opportunity to bring him in and to grill him about his insistence that he is going to use his position in South Africa to try and get South Africa to drop its case at the ICC. I mean, this has to be interrogated. He has to be asked, by what rhyme or reason does he, as a diplomat, no other diplomat would deign to have that, that kind of chutzpah to make that part of his diplomatic agenda. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, and I agree with you that I do hope that our friends and comrades here at Salam Media do take the opportunity to do that and to be, highly critical of his presence here and the agenda that he's trying to bring with him. And with that, unfortunately, we have to wrap up.
I should also add just finally, Dr. Abdullah,
please.
We have a very active Zionist lobby in South Africa. You can be sure that he will be seduced along the way by that Zionist lobby, and they will try to influence his outlook. So it's very important to counter that, through this kind of broad advocacy that I am trying to argue for.
Absolutely. And so I think with that final message, which I'm very glad that you added in right at the end, thank you so much, Professor Garth Pere, Senior Associate at the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection. Wishing you a good rest of the day. And to our listeners, we will be back with you after this short break.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a good day.